Hello, my name is Mikhail Ziger, and every week I'm speaking to the greatest minds of humanity to try to understand what can happen, not today, not tomorrow, but even after tomorrow. And today my guest is Alexander Kwasniewski, former president of Polish Republic. Hello, Mr. Kwasniewski.
Hello, Mikhail. Hello, everybody.
That's a pleasure to talk to you. And let's start our conversation with future. Although we all understand that after everything what has happened during the last month, it's extremely hard even to think about what's going to happen. But what do you think? What's your opinion about the possible outcomes of this war? Let's start with hardest question.
Yeah, the hardest probably the question, but it's necessary to start with such a remark that I think the majority of the people in the world didn't expect this war. We knew that Putin wants to have Ukraine own zone of influence, but we count on Putin's pragmatism, that he will not cross some red lines, and he did it. So the first is difficult to know what Putin is ready to do more, how much he's ready to use something what is unimaginable, like mass destruction weapon, nuclear weapon, etc. And this is a main problem. The second problem with all these predictions is that, frankly speaking, we don't know how the world will react to such dramatic situation in a very short time, because this Russian aggression started even not before the end of COVID crisis, but during the COVID crisis. So look that the world had such two serious crises in two serious crises in very short time. So that is the next problem: how to predict the future. Speaking about the war, I think the situation is following. The first, the plans of Putin are not fulfilled. It's not true that these main goals of so-called special military operation, what is the real war, are achieved. It is not true, because in my opinion, Putin wanted to have success after a very short time, some kind of blitzkrieg, to be in Kiev after 3-4 days of the war, and then to change the government in Kiev, using pro-Russian politicians, or even the politicians from the time before 2014, and it didn't happen, and that is impossible to make it. I think Putin knows now that Kiev is impossible to have in Russian hands if he will not use some biological or chemical weapon, what would be the real tragedy for hundred thousands of the people. So the first goal of Putin is not achieved. The second goal, to have Ukraine or the eastern Ukraine on the Russian side, is also not achieved, because the Ukrainian army is fighting very effectively. And that is also over our expectations. We didn't expect that Ukrainians are so good, that Ukrainian officers and generals are so good. But of course, I met many of Ukrainians last weeks, and they told me that probably one of advantages, Ukraine has some advantages on this military battle. The first is, of course, morale, because the morale of Ukrainian army is high, and morale of Russian army is very weak, because the majority of the soldiers, Russian soldiers, they don't understand why they go to Kharkiv by tanks and not by train or by bus to visit this nice city to speak only language, the same language, because Kharkiv is Russian speaking city in Ukraine. So the morale of Russians is poor, moral spirit of Ukrainians is high. But what is the next important element of the situation? Ukrainian officers and soldiers, they have a quite long experience from Donetsk, because this war started, frankly speaking, 2014. And the experience of these people is quite rich. They know what Russians are doing, how to react on Russians' activities, etc. And therefore, Ukrainians on the field are so good, and they are so successful. And the second goal of Putin is not achieved. Donetsk still, or this whole region of Donetsk and Lugansk, is not under Russian control. The third point of his plan is also not achieved, because Putin, I think, thought that because of the war, all this Western organization like NATO and European Union will have a problem to find common reaction, common decisions, that the war can disintegrate these two very hated by Putin organization like NATO and European Union. It didn't happen as well. NATO and European Union are much more united as before. And even I tell you what for me is a sensational decision, but when I heard yesterday that Finland is ready to ask for NATO membership, that shows the scale of Putin's catastrophe. Because neutrality for Finland was one of the main elements, was a part of Finnish identity. And today Finns, they are ready to ask for NATO membership. That's I think, extremely unexpected by Putin consequence of this crazy aggression. Next point. Putin said many times that Ukraine is not a state, Ukrainians are not the nation. And we see now that Ukraine is the nation with very, very strong own identity. And that is also increasing very much during this war. Nobody on the Ukrainian side is waiting for Russian troops with the flowers. They are waiting for them with the prepared weapon. So I think everything what Putin tried to achieve was wrong, is not achieved. And the problem what he will do next, I don't know. Two possible scenarios, and I don't know which scenario is better. The first scenario is for the next weeks that we'll have some kind of we will have negotiations, and the result of these negotiations will be some kind of ceasefire. It means that we have more or less the line of this dividing line between Russian army and Ukrainian troops, what we have now. Of course, ceasefire is good news, because it means that we have no more blood and no more victims. But what is bad?
Does it mean the frozen conflict for more months and years?
What I want to say, it means a frozen conflict for years. And that is, of course, I think not good for Ukraine, because it means permanent destabilization of this country, how to develop the country in the state of such frozen war. And I think this is also not good news for the world, because it means that this conflict, this frozen conflict, can start to be had again in one day, and we have the same story, and that is the main weakness of the ceasefire concept. And then the second scenario is probably the war will be continued. And if would be possible to win by Ukrainians, it means to restore the Ukrainian in this administrative borders of Ukraine. It means since 2004, from before 2014, that can be the chance to have some peace agreement with Russia and to start a new era. Of course, I don't mention even now Crimea, because I think that is absolutely different story, and that is very sensitive question for Russians. But whether this scenario is very likely, Ukrainians told me that that is possible. Yeah, but I have a question mark. So in any case, finally, we should be prepared for long-term conflict with a lot of predictable and unpredictable consequences, with the main question mark, which means what Putin, obsessed Putin, is ready to do against Ukraine now and in next coming weeks.
You know, recently I've spoken to several Ukrainian friends, some of them in Kiev, some of them in Lviv, and I've heard very unexpected prediction. I've never thought about that possibility before my conversations with those Ukrainians, but several people told me that it's clear for us, they said, that Putin is going to hit Poland next. What do you think? Is it possible?
Well, you know, because I said before that Putin is obsessed, and Putin is a man who is, in my opinion, out of the reality after 22 years in power, everything can happen. But it's necessary to understand that attack against Poland or Baltic states means the beginning of different war. It would be not a war between Russia and Ukraine. It will be the war between Russia and NATO. And that is something different. Because according to Article 5, NATO countries, they should support attacked country, let's say Poland. And we have American troops in Poland now. So it means really some kind of new, at least European war, and probably World War III.
So you mean that that's quite impossible, more or less?
In my opinion, well, I tell you, when I saw Putin, who said about this extra alert for nuclear units in Russia, I understood that everything is possible. Unfortunately, this guy is ready to do the most unexpected, dangerous crime things. And I cannot exclude nothing. But from the pragmatic point of view, I think it would be a huge mistake. It would be Russia-NATO war, and it would be the defeat of Russia. Because if today Russians are not ready to organize blitzkrieg against Ukraine, then after 43 days, they have a big problems with Ukrainian army. I cannot imagine that Russia, without nuclear weapon, could win the war against NATO. Because NATO is the biggest military alliance, you know, and if America will be involved in this war, that is some kind of craziness, which I read in some political fiction books, you know. But one day it can be not a political fiction, it can be the reality. What is so tragic, you know, that 2022, seriously, we discuss such issues, you know, seriously.
You say that NATO and European Union is more unified than they have ever been, but at the same time there are obviously two different points of view, and probably Poland represents the most active wing of NATO, and Poland is proposing NATO peacekeepers, more participation of European Union and NATO as well. And at the same time, Biden administration looks a bit more cautious. Do you think that Poland is going to emerge as the new, I don't know, new center of power in Europe because of this war, or how do you see the new architecture in the European Union and NATO?
First of all, I tell you, this activity on Poland or sensitivity of Poland is quite natural. We are today front country. We are next to Ukraine. We have the Polish-Ukrainian border were crossed by 2.5 million Ukrainian refugees. I think they moved to some, they went back and they moved to some other countries, but still, according to United Nations dates, we have 1.5, 1.7 Ukrainian refugees in Poland. So you should understand that it's not political vision of Poland to play some new role or to be new European superpower. That is absolutely false. We are in very special situation because we are eastern border of NATO and European Union as well. We have a humanitarian problem with a lot of Ukrainian refugees. We are very much afraid about own security as well, what you asked me one question earlier. So that is the reason why Poland is hyperactive, or why Poland should be hyperactive. Because in my opinion, when I was a president, I was also hyperactive in Ukrainian issues. Because in my opinion, that is not only Polish interest, that is a Polish. For Poland is a question of our security, of our future, of everything. And I understand as well that Spain or Italy are overactive in the questions of Mediterranean or Northern Africa. That is quite obvious. And Poland doesn't want to play a role. I think I criticized my government in the last 6 years because, in my opinion, Poland played not enough strong role in these two organizations, NATO and European Union, especially in European Union. I think Poland has absolutely legitimate place as one of the main decisive countries in European Union because of our potential, demography, economy, geographical location as well. We have a lot of such arguments. Unfortunately, current government, maybe not yet, but the first 5 years was not so much interested to play such role. They were much more troublemaker for European Union as a leading force of European Union. I think, especially after Brexit, Poland, Germany, France, and Poland not only could be such leading forces of European Union, but should be leading force of European Union because of many reasons. But still, Poland should protect these two organizations, NATO and European Union, very much, should work very much for unity of this organization, and should play strong, important role according to our potential. Not too much, not too less, but exactly according to our potential and strategic location of geographical location of Poland. So because I remember my conversation after Orange Revolution 2004 with Putin, he told me that he understands Polish engagement because that is a such traditional historical fight between two empires about Ukraine, the Russian Empire and Polish Empire. So that is not our ambitions, and that is not our plan. And I tell you even more, that is absolutely impossible to do. Poland can be and should be important country, member of European Union, but has no and cannot have ambitions to be superpower or power, even strong power in Europe. That is much too much. It would be absolutely unrealistic.
Yeah, our main goal is to speak about the future, but I cannot mention history, especially because you've mentioned Orange Revolution, and we all remember that you were a mediator between different sides during the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, and you met Putin a lot during your presidency. Do you consider that point, 2005, Orange Revolution, to be some kind of turning point in Putin's attitude to Ukraine? Sometimes it is said that that was the beginning of his new era of his geopolitical ambitions and his politics towards Ukraine. He started feeling that he is losing Ukraine and he must be more assertive and more aggressive.
Well, it's a good question. I tell you, I see in Putin's politics 3 chapters, let's say, because from the very beginning, he had such ambitions to rebuild Great Russia. And for Great Russia, Ukraine is absolutely crucial element, crucial place. Of course, Great Russia means also Belarus, it means also Caucasus, it means Central Asia, but historically, culturally, Ukraine is the most important. And in my opinion, since the beginning of his presidency, 2000, and Orange Revolution, it was, let's say, ambition, it was a dream, but it wasn't still the plan. After Orange Revolution, he decided to have a plan how to have Ukraine in Russian hands, in the Russian zone of influence. And why this Orange Revolution was so important? Because for Putinism, for this political system which was created by Putin, the example of democratic Ukraine was extremely dangerous. Because if you say to your people that Ukrainians are our brothers, Ukraine are not different people, that we are one nation, etc. The question is how Ukrainians can have a democratic system, political system, and why we in Russia, we cannot have such system. And I think the situation when in Ukraine during Orange Revolution, the people protested on the Maidan and on the streets in many Ukrainian cities against falsification of the election, against all this political violence what happened, and in favor of democracy, in favor of dignity of the people, in favor of civil society. I think ideologically, Orange Revolution was absolutely dangerous for Putin's ideological concept, and was the example for many simple, many ordinary Russians that, okay, our brothers from Ukraine, they can practice democracy. Why we cannot? So I think the Orange Revolution was some game changer of the situation. And since 2004, 2005, I think that is the second chapter in Putin's understanding and thinking about Ukraine. That is not longer a dream, that is our ambition, that is a plan, how to have Ukraine in all that. And after 2014, after annexation of Crimea, that is not only dream or a plan, that is also the obsession. In my opinion, since 2014, Putin is obsessed because of Ukraine, and therefore he decided to make such crazy things as aggression to 2022.
So you mean that in the beginning, when you were talking to him directly in 2004, you didn't see any
Even 2002, the most important meeting or conversation about Ukraine was 2002 in his private apartments in Kremlin. We spent something 4 or 5 hours, one-on-one, without translation, because I'm speaking Russian as well. So, 2002.
So, and what did you get from him that time? Did you see that potential to even to start a war, to hold Ukraine?
No. The war was absolutely, he didn't mention even of the war or some military measures. He said, or briefly speaking, because it was a long conversation, such things. First, that collapse of what we know from other statements of Putin, the collapse of Soviet Union was the biggest catastrophe, geopolitical catastrophe of 20th century. The second, that his ambition is to rebuild Great Russia. The Russia should be great, and everything would happen after collapse of Soviet Union. That is wrong, and Great Russia means, of course, Russia in sense of Tsarist Empire or Soviet Union, probably without Baltic states. We didn't discuss this idea of Great Russia in details, but the Ukraine was absolutely obvious element of this concept. Great Russia can be only with Ukraine and not without Ukraine. And the next point was about history and the leaders in Russian history. I asked him because he was very critical about Gorbachev. He was critical also, maybe not so much, but about Yeltsin. And then I asked him, Vladimir, tell me, who was such great leader in your opinion during the Russian history? And he called three persons: Peter the Great, Katerina the Great, and Joseph Vissarionovich. And what I remember very well, he didn't say Stalin, he said Joseph Vissarionovich. Mm-hmm. As a leaders who created this really great Russia with a huge impact on the world. And then, of course, I started to make jokes. I said, well, I understand that you would like to be number 4 on this short list. So the answer was, ha, 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 he, okay. And then I told him, look, if you would be number 4 on this list, you would be only the second Russian on this list. Because if you see this list, Peter the Great was Russian, then Katerina was German, Stalin was Georgian, and you would be number 2. So, but it was, discussion during his second year of presidency. And my impression was that, of course, I see the man who is formed by KGB education, KGB school books, and this books about the history, etc. What is absolutely falsified very much, but very much in favor of this understanding of great Russia and this Russian pride, etc. But of course, still, I thought that is much more like ambitious or dreams of new president and not a serious plan. And therefore, I told you that, in my opinion, these dreams were converted to the plan in 2004 after Orange Revolution. I think that's true. That's true.
Okay, one more question about history then. Back in 1996, before President Yeltsin was re-elected for the second presidential term, you and your personality and your experience winning over the Solidarność leader Lech Walesa was viewed as a possible example for Russia. That Poland is a democratic example, true democratic, where leftist, almost communist leader could win a democratic election, and the true democratic candidate Lech Walesa accepted his defeat. But as we all know, Russia didn't follow Poland's footsteps, and President Yeltsin and his team did their best to not to let Zyuganov win that election. Do you think that was a mistake for Russia? Do you think that was possible for Russia to follow Polish footsteps, and would it make a real difference, real change?
No, I tell you, first of all, I'm very much against such comparisons, because Poland and Russia, that are two different entities. Of course, we were in Soviet bloc, but we never been Soviet Republic. Poland was much more connected with the West. We didn't have such imperial ambitions, so that is impossible to compare. If you want to find some comparisons, in my opinion, if you know that in '96 Yeltsin was fighting mainly against Zyuganov. Yes. Yeah. So, and it was a fight between post-communists, because in my opinion Yeltsin was a post-communist those time, against communists. Because Zyuganov, I think even now, he's a real pure communist. So
that's how, he has become orthodox communist, is not a true communist.
Okay, so this is maybe for next our conversation.
Yeah,
we'll discuss this issue, because I think Yeltsin was better solution for Russia '96 as others, because unfortunately in this election '96, Russia had not prepared, let's say, the leader of new generation, much more, let's say, democratic-oriented, liberal-oriented, etc. I tell you, I met Yeltsin several times, And of course, to say about Yeltsin that he was Democrat is much too much. But I tell you one thing, Yeltsin is one of very, very few Russian politicians who I met who had democratic instinct. You know, that if he had on the table two decisions, more democratic or less democratic, he decided for more democratic side. Probably not full democratic side, but more democratic side. Unfortunately, you know, he was probably not enough energetic in the last years, not enough healthy, etc., etc. But I think 96 election of Yeltsin was I think better for I think the best in this period of time for Russia. We can of course, you know, that is very historical thinking what we do now. Of course, probably would be better to have a man who would be something around 50, better educated, with more Western or more work experience, but you didn't have such person. You know? So in this fight between Yeltsin and Zyuganov, I think Yeltsin was better choice.
Okay.
But please don't compare Poland, because you know in Poland, Wałęsa, it's a hero. He was a hero in the 80s. He was a leader of Solidarity movement. He was, and still he has strong own position in Polish history. But frankly speaking, his presidency was not the best. And I was elected, of course, as a post-communist, but also as a representative of new generation, because when I was elected, I was 41. Generation much better educated, with good knowledge about the world, because during my students' time, I visited Europe, I visited the United States, etc. Of course, Soviet Union as well. So I think it was decision. Very democratic decision of Polish people to have not only the symbol as a president, but also more pragmatic and more effective president. And I hope that I did my job well, and still I'm the most popular president among ex-presidents in Poland. So that's a huge source of satisfaction. Yes.
Yeah, congratulations. Okay, we're not comparing Russia to Poland, but still having in mind a very huge expertise and a huge experience of decommunization of Poland. What can be done for deputinization of Russia? What can happen to Russian people after Putin? What can happen to Russian society? What should be done for Russian society to be healed from all those imperial complexes?
Oh, I tell you, your questions are so important, so good, and the answers are so difficult, I tell you. Because, first of all, if the Putinization will start, it will be a good day for the world. Because I think today we are too much in Putin's hands. We cannot predict what he wants to do. We are afraid about him, etc. All this dialogue is absolutely ineffective. You know, Putin had a lot of conversation with Macron, Scholz, others, Biden as well. He said many times, "No, we will have not a war." Of course, we have not a war because we have a special military operation. But the results and the consequences are the same. This man lies every day. This man doesn't respect interlocutors, partners. He's a dangerous person. And of course, if one day his time will be finished, it will be the time of the hope. And the first hope is that after Putin, we'll have something or some who would be not the Putin number 2 or the copy of Putin, what is also very likely. That in Russia, after Putin, we can have, again, some nationalistic, imperialistic politicians in power. But speaking seriously about the Putinization, I think the first and probably one of the most complicated is to start to open doors for civil society. I remember one of my conversations with Putin, because we had quite several conversations in this period, 2000-2005. Our last conversation was And our last meeting was 9th of May 2005, during this ceremonies of the victory over Germany, fascism. And during one of this conversation, we discussed the question of civil society. And Putin told me, you know, that is a not good concept for Russia, because we have not tradition of civil society. And I told him, look, of course I know, because I know the history of Russia quite well. And of course you don't have this tradition of civil society, but you will not have this tradition if you will not start. So it's necessary to start. Putin never started to establish civil society. He did a lot, and he's doing a lot against civil society, against the freedom of the people, against freedom of speeches, against freedom of media, against NGOs, etc., etc. Against also education in sense of civil society. What means civil society? That you have own dignity, you have own rights, you can fulfill these rights, but you take some of responsibility as well. That's his responsibility of your community, of your country, of your nation, etc., etc. And I think the civil society issue, that's what is the beginning of this deputinization process. It's necessary to start. Of course, that is not a task for a year, for 5 years, that is task for decades, but it's possible to do. And I think Poland and other post-Soviet bloc countries are good example. The second is change of the system of the governance. Because, of course, this is a next Russian myth, that in such big country with such huge territory, the power should be very centralized. We need one leader, we need strong power, etc. Of course, I'm not against effective leadership. And I think in Russia, this leadership cannot be like in Poland. Probably the level of decentralization cannot be so deep as we have here in my country. But I think it's necessary to decentralize this country. It's necessary to make this system of governance much more collective, with the real role of the parliament, with the real role of the political parties, with the real influence of public opinion, with a lot of elements which create this system, what Americans called a check and balance system. One of the problems of Putin's Russia is that the power is not only centralized, this power is very individualized. That is Putin only. Well, that is the next point. Third point, very important for the future and the element of the Putinization, is the question of rule of law. You know, independent judiciary, serious judiciary, respect to the law. And not only by citizens, by the people on the street, because they should drive with right speed. No, the rule of law means that first of all, the politicians, the leaders, the decision makers, they are working according to the rules, according to the law. And I think that would be the biggest and the most difficult change for Russia. And finally, I think in this deputinization is necessary to look for the word in different style, because Russian understanding of the global world is that the situation win-win doesn't exist. In all relationships which we have in the world, we have winners and losers. And of course, it's quite natural that we want to be on the side of the winners. But I tell you, if you want to have the future as a humanity, it's necessary to accept the rules, no win or win-win situations. That you cannot realize only your ambitions, only your plans. You have to understand the interests of others and to find some compromises. I think that is something what I know is possible or not, but would be the great change in this politics of post-Putin era, that Russia starts to be not only the enemy, not only the competitor, but also the partner in many things: security, climate, economy, etc., etc. So, of course, and then finally, I understand that each post-Putin leader will have the same feeling of Russian dignity, of Russian pride, of Russian history, of everything. So and that is not a problem for me, because when I tell you such story, when I was working together with Jacques Chirac, president of France. It's exactly in my 10 years, he was my partner from French side. And when we discuss different issues, some kind of controversial issues, the last argument of Chirac was, no, I cannot do it because that is against la grandeur de la France, the greatness of France. It was his, and I understand that such empires like France, like Britain, or new empire like United States or China and Russia as well, you have such feeling. That is very much in your DNA. And I understand that in some discussion, this man after Putin will say, no, I cannot do it because that is greatness of Russia. Россия, наша история мне не разрешает. Yeah, okay, I can understand. But it's the last point. You have to understand others. You have to be much more partner as a only competitor or enemy. I tell you, that is such a little bit improvised answer to your very important and difficult question. But I think if Russia would go such way, can be very important, one of the most important players in global politics, and much more friendly player and much more effective player as today's Russia, Putin's Russia, is now.
I think if I spoke to many of your colleagues right now, former presidents, European politicians, some of them would definitely say that Russia would fall apart. Do you think that that could happen?
That's also interesting. We know from the history of Russia, especially in 20th century, that after each imperialistic war in which Russia was involved, started civil war. That is the story of and Bolshevik revolution. So I can imagine that after this war, if Russia will be defeated, and we can have some kind of serious interior tensions and consequences of that. Whether Russia can be disintegrated deeper as is now is possible, because we have some regions which they have a lot of resources of minerals, etc. The territories of these regions are huge. Yakutia, for example, that is 3 million square kilometers, something like that, and a lot of various resources. But that is possible scenario, but I don't believe very much in this scenario. I think still, even after such dramas what we have now, if Russia, if we have some who after Putin, I think he can have enough power to keep this territory what Russia has now. Of course, I don't speak about Ukraine. I don't speak about Belarus and Central Asia. But in my opinion, the Russian Federation has a lot of arguments, has a lot of instruments to keep own territorial integrity.
In Russia, and not only in Russia, there is a lot of discussion about collective responsibility of Russian people, and probably about the culture, like canceling of Russian culture, canceling of Russian language. We hear a lot about Ukrainian people who used to speak Russian for all of their lives, now cannot and stop speaking Russian because that language is a symbol of aggression for them now. What do you think about that problem? Is there going to be Russian culture and language cancelled in Europe?
First of all, this is my very, very personal and very deep conviction. We fight now because we are against Russian politics, Putin's politics, etc. But we cannot fight against Russian culture, against the Russian language, against normal citizens. That is a big mistake. If we would start to fight against language, culture, and ordinary people, it means that we are not different as Putin. We are not close, not very far away from his understanding of the world. Of course, Putin is mistaken. He speaks in very barbarian style when he says that Ukrainians are not a nation. That's, if you know Ukrainians, if you know that they have own language, they have Taras Shevchenko, they have own writers like Andruchovich, Zabuchko, the very good contemporary writers from Ukraine and Ukrainian language. To say then that they are not a nation, that is barbaric. That is something barbaric. That is something what I cannot accept. So the same from my side. I'm against Putin's politics, but it doesn't mean that I don't like Shostakovich or Rostropovich or Chekhov or Tolstoy or others. This is different stuff. In my opinion, in Ukraine, they did a big mistake with this language law. I think it was a mistake, and the Ukrainians gave the chance for Putin to use it, to even misuse this law before and now. Why the Ukrainians then started not to speak Russian? Not because it's forbidden, because when all of them they are speaking Russian. Because that's a reaction on this aggression. It's a reaction. First time I was confronted with this situation 2014, because each year I had my lectures in some Ukrainian universities, and I was speaking Russian. And I'm again in the same university. I see the same rector, and he told me, Mr. President, and could you not speak Russian? I said, look, but I cannot speak Ukrainian. I understand Ukrainian, but I don't speak Ukrainian. So English? He said, okay, English. But I asked, and the students, they will understand me? More or less, they will understand me. So but it was reaction, annexation of Crimea, Donetsk and Lugansk. It was such natural reaction, because why we, in our school, in our university, why we will use the language of aggression? I think that today, 22, the situation is even more dramatic, because really Russians are aggressors. They destroy the cities, they destroy the buildings. Let's understand the man who is speaking, of course, Russian, and his family, wife and kids are in Poland somewhere. He is with the weapon on some streets of Mariupol or Kiev or something like that, and attack is coming from Russian side.
Yeah, definitely.
And that is dramatic mistake of Putin. If I speak about Ukrainians, they are the same nation, they are brothers. Why I want to kill my brothers? This is brotherhood war. And I tell you, in the history of humanity, the most dramatic, the most bloody were such wars, brotherhood wars. And Putin decided to start it. That is something what I cannot understand, that I cannot accept. But I'm not against Russian language. If you want to continue this interview in Russian, we can do it. I have no problems with that. The same about the culture. I'm very much against if some in the theaters they decided to eliminate from the program the pieces of Chekhov of others. That's a mistake. No, Russian culture is a part of the culture of the mankind. That's it.
Definitely. These days, we all first we should discuss. First, we should think that this war should be stopped. And it's a bit, it may sound a bit too pragmatic to start thinking about something that would follow the war, but still, I think we hope that when the war is over, we'll be able to think of some more issues, some more problems will turn up. So I'd like to ask about one more problem that could happen, that could turn up after the war. Do you think that the rise of nationalism could be the new European perspective? Because today's authorities in Poland are quite nationalist, and Poland is not an exception in Europe. We see that even in France, National Front is on rise. And probably that would be a logical consequence of this war. What do you think of this perspective?
I think the problem is more complex because this increasing support for nationalists started before the war. That is a not new phenomenon. I think nationalism and the support for nationalism is connected with a lot of elements. One of these elements is globalization, is technological revolution, the situation that more and more people, they feel themselves as excluded. They cannot adopt easily in this new situation. Then we had financial crisis, and this financial crisis created very, very deep inequality, and also it was a good source for nationalistic parties to use it. Then we had migration crisis 2015, and was the next element which support nationalism very much, because migration means that other peoples are coming, foreigners, they want to change our normal situation, behaviors, etc. And now we have COVID. It was a very special time because COVID worked on both sides. Because during COVID, I think many people understood that without international cooperation, without global cooperation, we cannot be successful. We cannot win with such problems as pandemic. How much this war will support nationalistic movements or nationalistic politicians? I think it can happen. Yeah, but it depends very much of the results of the war. Because if Russia, Putin will win, if Ukraine will be occupied by Putin, I think, of course, it will be the big defeat of the democratic world. And secondly, it can create more support for nationalism, because such natural answer of the voters would be, you see, all these big organizations like NATO or like European Union cannot help us. Its only chance for us is to consolidate ourselves as a nation. And of course, and the nationalists are the best to promote such slogans. But if this war will have different end, and Ukraine will win, or will have some peace deal, what means that Ukraine can develop as an independent sovereign country, member of European Union, because in my opinion, by the way, that is the most important politically. What we have to do now is to offer for Ukraine full membership in European Union immediately after the war. Immediately after the war, with 100% of Ukrainian territory, 80% of Ukrainian territory is necessary to accept Ukraine as a new member, of European Union. So a lot depends of the result or the end of the war. But in any case, I think we Democrats, we should be prepared that two movements, they will have a chance to develop, and they will play the role in the future, that is nationalist and populist. Because the situation in the world is extremely complicated. We have a lot of unpredictable situation. The future is, generally speaking, unpredictable. We have a new geopolitical situation, because China is fighting for the position number one. America wants to stay as a number one. Russia has own ambitions. India own ambitions. European Union wants to play some role as well. So this period of time, what we have now, is extremely chaotic. Extremely chaotic. And Russian aggression creates this chaos even stronger, even bigger. And I think that is really the space that is the environment in which nationalists and populists have a lot of chances to lie, to propose such very simple and not realistic solutions, and to collect more and more votes. For me, very, very important day is coming. That is next Sunday, the election, the first round of French election, because frankly speaking, if Macron will win, the Europe will be much more predictable. If Le Pen will win, that is really the next dramatic moment in the history of this democratic, prosperous, and progressive Europe, which was my dream as a young man, and then the dream which are fulfilled or which came true as when I was a president.
Mm-hmm. You know, as we all said that we could never imagine and could never have foreseen such a situation and such a war, but actually during the first weeks of the war, I saw a lot of quotations from, and maybe you too, from a recent book written by American author George Friedman. It was written almost a decade ago, even earlier, and he actually predicted the war against Russia, the Russian war against Ukraine, and had even more forecasts about future of Europe. And according to George Friedman, Russia is going to be disintegrated, as well as China, and three new superpowers would turn up, and those superpowers will be Poland, Japan, and Turkey. What do you think of those far-going forecasts?
I know this book of Friedman, and I know Friedman, and I like him. He's a very intelligent person, and of course that's the problem with such books, because the author can write what he wants to write, you know. And of course, the nature of this book about the future is that in 100 pages, you can find some pages which are the reality now. But in my opinion, first of all, I'm very much distanced to this idea of Russian disintegration, the disintegration of Russian Federation. Secondly, I don't think that China will be disintegrated. I can imagine some real problems inside China, especially this big tensions between modern economy, very globalized economy, and very archaic political system with the ruling role of one party, Communist Party. So that I can imagine such internal conflict of China, but I'm very far away with the vision of disintegration. Of course, this idea that three new superpowers, Japan, and Turkey, and Poland will be driving places of the future is close to our, let's say, vanities, you know, or understanding of our role. But I think if these three countries will play and should play the role, that's only like a regional leader. Because I have no doubts that Poland has a chance and even is obliged to play the role, positive role, as a good example of democracy, good example of neighborhood relations, etc., in the region of Central and Eastern Europe, together with Ukraine, the future with Belarus, etc. I think in this sense, Poland has a role to play. The same with Turkey. I think Turkey in this region, and especially between Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries in Central Asia, etc., can play also quite positive role. Japan in the Asian region, but I don't believe that instead China, United States, Russia, these three countries can be some big players. Of course, for me, speaking about the future, the most important is the question of the future of European Union, because I think now we are closer to understand what was not so obvious 3 or 4 years ago, that only chance for Europe is to be united. that even the strongest countries in Europe, like Germany or France or Poland, if we are alone, if we want to do something on our own, that is not enough. We are not enough strong. European Union together, 500 million people, good economy, good educational system, good healthcare system. That is something what we have to protect, what we have to develop, especially through stronger elements of common policies, foreign policy, security policy, climate policy, etc. And if we will be enough clever now to keep this unity and to develop our cooperation as members of the European Union, then we can play the role together with China, United States, and probably post-Putin Russia, because with Putin's Russia it's impossible to cooperate, because he lies, he doesn't respect the partners, and his imperialistic politics is absolutely unacceptable, because that is drama for the people, and frankly speaking, this is the main drama for the future of Russia.
Okay, probably coming to my last question. I know that you've spent a lot of time in Ukraine recently. You were a member of supervisory board of Babyn Yar Foundation, working along with our mutual friend Ilya Khzhanovsky. You visited Kyiv, you met President Zelensky. How can you describe the post-war future of Ukraine? Hopefully it will come soon, based on your impressions from Kyiv, from Zelensky, from his behavior and his image during the war, and your own impressions.
Okay, so I tell you, then, of course, because Ukraine has time on war, so the question of security is the most important now. I don't know what kind of, I think the main dilemma what Zelensky has now is how much to go forward and to finish this war by some real success. Mm-hmm. Of course, maybe not on Crimea, but Donetsk, Lugansk, yes. Of course, it will cost a lot of energy, of victims as well, and he needs military equipment, he needs everything. Or Zelensky is ready to stop this war and to find some peace agreement, which probably will be not very widely accepted by Ukrainians, because today Ukrainians are very much in such feeling of enthusiasm, of fight. They want to fight. So we'll see. But in any case, if we can dream a little bit, if one day Ukraine will have such agreement, peace agreement and peace, first is necessary to have very strong international guarantees for Ukraine. And this is a very difficult issue because, as you know, Ukraine had such guarantees signed in Budapest, 1994. And it was signed by permanent members of Security Council of United Nations, including Russia, China, of course, France, Britain, and
those guarantees didn't help.
Yeah, not did it help. Today, that's just like a piece of paper, nothing more. So, how to prepare such serious guarantees, that is a case. And that is a task not only for Zelensky, that's a task for Americans, Macron, others, and Chinese as well. You know, how we want to guarantee territorial integrity and security for Ukraine. But again, I want to dream a little bit. We have such guarantees. And then we have a time for, let's say, reconstruction of Ukraine. And in my opinion, is necessary after such guarantees to decide that Ukraine is a full member of the European Union. And it's necessary to prepare the funds, special funds for reconstruction of Ukraine and for development of Ukraine. Of course, would be very important that Russia will participate in such fund, but I don't believe that they will do it. But they by international law, they will be obliged to pay some reparation for everything what happened in Ukraine last week. But okay, so Ukraine is a member of the European Union. Ukraine has funds for reconstruction, and many of refugees are coming back to Ukraine. So the Ukraine has a potential to reconstruct the country. And Zelensky, as an extremely popular and let's say, world recognized leader, is prepared with his team to start to build, in some sense, new Ukraine. Ukraine 2.0, you know, because Ukraine can be very modern. Because, you know, today, after the war, the task will be not only to rebuild old buildings and old infrastructure, but to build new buildings and new reconstruction, to make Ukraine much more modern, much more economically effective. And I think using this mood of this war, of this fight, of this Ukrainian pride, of Ukrainian identity, would be possible to use this potential very much like in Poland after World War II, when we rebuilt the cities, etc., like in Western Germany after the war. So I think that can be very special synergy of many, many elements to build really strong, modern, and very effective, successful nation and country in the 21st century. But that is today, when we speak, when we have 43rd day of the war, that seems much more like a dream, like a good plan for the future, but very far away from the reality.
Let's hope it will come true very soon. Thank you, Mr. President. That was very interesting to talk to you.
Thank you very much. All the best. Thank you.
I thank you all. Hope to see you again next week, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Zigor.